Hey guys, this is Ryan. Welcome back to Bathos. I hope you're having a good week. Hope you've had a great small group. We only have a couple weeks left, and so hope you're wrapping up this semester on a good note, and that these videos and these groups have been beneficial. We'd love to hear your feedback about that, so talk to Al, Scott, anybody on staff, the interns, whoever, um, about your experience so that we can learn how to better lead and serve you guys in the future. So I preached at Underground this last week and talked about what it means to be a disciple in hard and difficult and confusing times when Jesus was heading towards his death and the disciples weren't following what he was doing, weren't tracking with what he was doing, with what he was saying, telling them they were going to deny him, telling them they weren't going to follow him, they were going to betray him, all these things. And so part of that, the reaction to that is being a disciple in the midst of that requires humility. It's a little bit about what I talked about. I mentioned it. I want to go a little more in depth with humility and the discipline of humility in your groups. So just have a couple things for you, a few verses, and then some questions. So talking about humility, I think there are two important aspects of it that I want to talk about that I think tie in really well with the two greatest commandments that Jesus gives us. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. I think humility is an important part of how you can love well, love God well, and love people well. So just diving into that. So number one, loving God and humility, having humility in your relationship with God. James 4:10 says, "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up." 1 Peter 5:6 says almost the exact same thing, different author, same sentiment. "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that He may lift you up in due time." And so it's this idea of submitting yourself to God in humility results in being lifted up and being exalted. This idea that I think Scott mentioned a couple weeks ago of servanthood, the first will be last and the last shall be first. Scripture also tells us that God humbles the proud and exalts the humble. And so we all desire to be in an exalted place with God, for Him to love us and to lift us up and to know that we are part of His family. But in order for that to happen, it requires that submission and that humility, to admit that you are not God and to admit that He knows better and He knows best. I think the part of the disciples not being willing to understand what Jesus was saying because they thought they knew better. Jesus telling them He's going to die, and they say, no, that's not going to happen. And Peter specifically not being willing to admit that it's even possible for him to deny Jesus. He was just so adamant, no, there's no way I'm willing to die for you. Because he didn't have the humility to submit and to ask, is that possible? Especially when you're talking to Jesus, who he's admitted is the Christ. But also just to think, maybe I'm not as committed. Maybe I'm not as far along as I think I am, or I think I have been, or I want to be. What would have happened if Peter would have said, "Is that possible? Am I not capable of following Jesus to death yet?" And so having that humility, that posture of spirit, to hear God even when it doesn't make sense, and say, "God, I don't understand. I don't have the capacity to know, but I submit and trust, place my faith and hope in you, that what you say is true and what you're doing is best." And that results in the end in our glorification at the end when we go to heaven, and everything is renewed and everything is reborn. We can spend eternity with God. It takes a humility to being willing to say, I don't know how to do it. I can't do it. I need you. And placing God ahead of yourself. Placing yourself second, placing yourself last. And so that's just a little bit about humility with God. Second is the humility in loving and relationship and living on this earth with other people. That especially has some tie-ins with the first part. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. Putting others before yourself. So much like the talk when Scott talked about servanthood, is it takes a great deal of humility in order to be able to serve people that well when you place others before you. Philippians 2:3 says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. In humility, value others above yourself." And so it's one thing to be willing to serve and to help people. Everybody has some innate nature to want to do good, but there's something different about having the humility to actually value other people above yourself. If you actually value their lives, their hearts, their minds above your own, then you couldn't do anything other than serve them. And that's hard and that's difficult. It's really hard to stop putting ourselves and our needs and our desires and our opinions and our wants above others, because Jesus says to love your neighbor as you love yourself. We innately, naturally love ourselves. And so loving other people that much and loving people more than that is difficult. I think an important aspect of that is that I want to talk about is judging others. It takes humility to not think you know better, to not think that they're doing something that you wouldn't do or you don't think is best. Because the reason we do what we do, the reason we think what we think and say what we say is because we think we're right. And it takes a great deal of humility to admit maybe we don't know it all. Maybe this person knows something, has a little bit of information, has a little bit of experience or perspective that would be beneficial to me. And so I'm thinking of this in the context of the divisiveness in the elections that have just happened. It's been there hasn't been much humility in it. Whether you're the candidate who thinks you're good enough to be the president, or you're all the people who think your candidate is so much better than who somebody else thinks is better. And so I think humility is a key aspect of how to bridge that divide, how to love others in the midst of disagreement. Because with name calling, with sort of deconstructing and narrowing everything down to one specific point that you think is more important than what somebody else thinks is more important, it doesn't leave any space for conversation and compromise and making peace in the midst of disagreement. It takes humility and submission, like I said a second ago, to admit that you don't know it all, to admit you don't have all the experience and the perspective that other people have, and that you can learn from other people and their perspectives and their opinions. And I think when we're willing to place ourselves in that state where we can look other people in the eye that we disagree with and say, this is what I value and what I think, and I love you, and because I love you and want to, we don't have to reach an agreement, but at least reach some kind of understanding and mutual respect. So I want to hear what you're saying, and I want to understand, and I want to know where you're coming from. Because the better I know where you're coming from, the better I can help you understand where I'm coming from. That doesn't mean that we all have to be in agreement, but it means that we can love each other better. It means that we can serve each other better, even in disagreements, even in hard times. It's part of placing others before your own instead of telling everybody why they're wrong and telling everybody why you're right. Being willing to listen to other people takes a great deal of humility. No matter where you come from, no matter who you are, no matter who you're talking to, that person that you're talking to, that you're trying to love, is made in the image of God, just the same way you are, and they need Jesus just as much as you do. And recognizing that takes humility, And it takes a humble heart and humble spirit to be able to love somebody as another image bearer of God. And so that's my encouragement to you is both of those things, placing God before yourself, placing other people before yourselves, loving in humility, serving in humility, being willing to admit that you don't know what's best, submitting your heart and your life and your thoughts to God, even when it doesn't make sense. And then also what Philippians 2 and 3 says, in humility, value others above yourself. And you'll be able to love them better. So some discussion questions I have for you guys are pretty simple. What are some of the ways that you have lacked humility in relation to God and to others? What are some places you haven't been willing to submit to God, where you think you know better, where you think your ways might be better than God's ways? And where have you seen yourself as higher or better than others? Not submitting and loving them as well as you can and should have. Number 2, what is a practical way you can begin to humble yourself before God and others? How can you start? I talked about this as a discipline, and it's not something that you just do. It's something you have to work at, something you have to ask God for, something you have to think about. That's why I'm tying it into this whole spiritual disciplines thing. Is when you're praying, when you're talking to God, Lord, I submit. I want to submit. Help me to love others better. So what are ways you can work on that discipline? Think about it more. Think about specific places, specific people, in which you might need a little more humility. And then lastly, how might your life and relationship improve if you worked more on that discipline? So I hope this has been a good discussion, good starter. And I hope and pray this is a discipline that you will think of throughout the coming weeks and continue to grow and will bring more fruit in your relationship with God and relationship with other people. So that's it. You guys have a good week. We'll see you soon. Bye.